Good morning, Dallas. Moms, dads, student athletes. If you have a question about NIL, name, image, and likeness, you're going to want to turn this up right now. I've got the leading expert on the matter here with me on the show. I want to introduce Ryan A. Rogers, Esquire, and name, image, likeness. That's the conversation that's happening across kitchen tables this morning. So talk about name, image, likeness, and why you want to make sure that young athletes are protected when it comes to that issue.
In the words of the legendary management guru Tom Peters, is that we all need to understand that we're all personal brands, and your number one job as CEO of Me Inc. is to become a marketer of you. What's really important about NIL at this particular time is publishing rights. So recently, the courts have decided that NCAA had what amounts to a monopoly on copyrights for the student athletes. So in this era where you have social media is just so prevalent, people are allowed to, or student athletes have recently been allowed to actually earn profits from their name, image, and likeness.
Right, and they can earn profits, they can set themselves up for even greater success as being a student athlete. So let's talk about where this all came from, because you yourself were a student athlete and have kind of seen the background of like how students are taken advantage of. What is that process like for kids?
Well, I think really the biggest thing is just like not knowing what you don't know. I mean, it's helpful to have someone to guide you on rights, responsibilities that you have under the law. So when you're talking about copywriting, you're talking about intellectual property. There's a property right that we all own in anything that's original content that we create, including name, image, and likeness, trademark, trade names, those things. So again, with the recent court decided that basically what the NCAA had was a monopoly on name, image, and likeness, which is violating of antitrust laws. They've decided to open that up and allow students to actually benefit from their name, image, and likeness, whereas before, NCAA was like 100% in control of all image and likeness for all student athletes.
Right, and so as a student athlete, you need to be getting your bag too, which is the title of your book, How to Get the Bag. And you actually list the 7 steps to do that.
That's right.
There's so many of them, but let's give one that is the best takeaway for our audience today.
So again, like I said in the earlier quote, we need to understand that we are CEOs of brand Me. Tom Peters calls it Me Inc. In my book, I actually call it Me LLC, which is sort of like an homage to the disregarded entity. For tax purposes, the single member LLC is treated as a disregarded entity or sole proprietor for tax purposes. With name, image, and likeness, what student athletes need to understand is that what they have right now is not just the influence that they're comfortable with online, but there's a distinction to be made between being an influencer and being an entrepreneur.
I want to kind of dig into like your experiences and your past a little bit, because I feel like that's really defined and shaped who you are today. Tell me about, your childhood.
I grew up raised by a teenage single mother in the inner city of Detroit, and many people who grew up in the same demographic, or many student athletes who grew up in the same demographic. There wasn't a whole lot of financial literacy that was taught. We sort of like learned by default. Once someone told me that's called paying tuition, like learning lessons the hard way. The lessons that you pay for is like paying tuition. And so at this point, having sort of paid enough tuition, literally and figuratively speaking, it's sort of like, if I only had knew then what I know now. And so it sort of beckons me to sort of give back and be a resource to these young student athletes so that they don't have to learn the hard way. So many athletes, you hear these horror stories about once they go professional, 4 or 5 years after they retire or after, gameplay is over, they're bankrupt. And a lot of that has to do with the mentality that doesn't really prepare for the long term.
That mindset, and knowing early on that you can be whatever you want to be and make money and save money. Those are lessons that you say that you didn't have as a child. Is that why kids now call you like their big bro?
Yeah, well, they call me Big Bro because I think it's sort of like a take one to know one type of thing. I'm really a no nonsense and I'm a tough love. I got a lot of that from my mother. I can just remember, and probably like a lot of student athletes, you hear about the time commitment and managing time with studies and athletic responsibilities among student athletes. There's high rates of mental illness and depression among these athletes. But I can just remember the tough love I got from my mom when I was going through the same thing, even in law school. I was complaining about being broke. I was complaining about how tough it is. And my mom said to me, Ryan, you're here because you want to be here.
Right.
This is where you want to be.
Right.
And it just made me think that, whatever the cost is what we have to do. But the main thing is to have a plan and a platform and some type of strategy to be successful. So my framework for success with the notion of Me LLC is media, entertainment, leveraging leadership and content. And so that's exactly what these student athletes are doing, but we want to just be able to encapsulate this, or we want to bring this under an umbrella of a legal entity and not just as the person, because what's afforded to the individual as a legal entity compared to as the individual is you get tax write-offs, you get tax credits, you get qualified expenses that again offset earnings. So these are all things that as an individual you probably wouldn't talk about these things. It's not, money is not free. There's one thing that student athletes don't really understand, and in general, the general public doesn't understand. They don't understand that string that's attached to every dollar that you spend. Every dollar you spend, you got $1 in your pocket. When you go spend it at the store, there's something attached to it called sales tax. Every time you earn money, there's a string attached to it. It's called income tax. And so what we want to do is we want to highlight the responsibilities when you actually use money and what money is. It's currency. It's not your property. It's a unit of exchange. And so we want to teach them how to responsibly manage that unit of exchange.
Absolutely. That's a great point. So parents need to be involved very early with their children and explaining some of these financial, a bank account, checking account. But then when is it time to get lawyered up?
The perfect time to lawyer up is before you need one. And if you need a good lawyer, you found me. I just happen to be one.
So everybody in a position like this is their own business or company.
That's correct. I think what's most important for student athletes and creators to understand that you are the CEO of your own personal brand enterprise, Me LLC.
So name 3 things that every student athlete needs to understand about NIL.
3 things that student athletes really need to understand about NIL are they need to understand media, purpose for media, they need to understand entrepreneurship, and they also need to understand content.
All right, so we've got some big names right now. I'm thinking about, NCAA basketball. Angel Reese, she's going to go into the WNBA. She's going to have a great career. What would you give advice to her or anyone like her about NIL?
There's a distinction to be made between an influencer and an entrepreneur. These kids have a high NIL valuation. Largely, 75% of NIL valuation comes from social media following and social media activities. What they really need to understand is this is a strategic business activity. So NIL in and of itself is not just about likes and following. This is literally about enterprise and marketing and commerce. So the one thing I would have her to understand is that take care of the business of NIL first. As long as the business is in order, then the other things that she's focusing on in terms of popularity and media and following, all those things will work just fine.
Very great tips, and you can find them all in his book, which is available now on Amazon and I guess in your website as well.
Yes, you can find us Boss of Me LLC, and you'll get information there. And you can also find us on Instagram at Boss of Me LLC as well.
All right, thank you so much.